Boom! What's up, everybody? Welcome back to this week's episode. I got Meagan Hooshyar, I think, maybe,
Yep, you got it.
on for a conversation. Super pumped. Thanks for joining. As always, we kick it off. I had to pause her. She was telling me the whole story. So enlighten us with your wild, funny, crazy story.
Yeah. So I was just telling you that I feel like throughout the years of between being a student athlete and coaching and now in sport administration, the best stories I have oftentimes are the travel mishaps that happen, and inevitably they have existed at every level in each of the schools that I've been at. But the one that I laugh about still to this day is when I was competing as a student athlete, we were taking a charter bus home, which I was just explaining to you is I think the reason that I still find this funny is because for us that was we were usually in church vans and it was very few and far between that we were even on planes traveling,
Yeah.
and this was a longer bus trip. We had been coming back from a couple of games. I could not tell you where at this point. And our bus driver was cutting through, or we were leaving a food stop, whatever it may be, coming through a parking lot. And we're all sitting looking at this turn that we were making. And I think anybody who's been on a charter bus, bless the bus drivers for having to maneuver through the spaces and places that they do. But I think all of us have had those moments where we're like, I don't know that this one's gonna work out really. And so we were coming around this corner, and I don't even know how or why we were as close as we were, but we were coming around a Chick-fil-A uh, drive-through area. And they have those big poles at the top that tell
Yeah.
you 12 feet and under, or 7 feet and under, whatever it may be. And we're coming around that curve, and we're all like, that is looking awfully close to the bus there. And sure enough, as we took the turn, that uh bar, whatever it may be, came through the
Oh,
side of
wow.
the window into slowly. So no,
Yeah.
there wasn't really like a real significant danger. But my teammate that was sitting in that space, who was leaning up against the window and the pillow, we were like, I mean, now is the time to shift away from that. And sure enough, we had to all empty out the bus, and we had to sit and wait for a new bus. And for what it is burned in my brain, we all got Chick-fil-A milkshakes, which was quite the treat because at that point we were stuck for quite a while. And so every time, like I said, I have been in a number of situations with buses where we have had to sit and wait for one reason or another. And that story always comes back up of, well, let me tell you about this one time that
Yeah.
this is not that. So
I
all
love
parts
it.
of us are still intact.
Yeah. That's funny. So how did we get to this point, right? Like, I know we were kind of talking a little bit before, hitting record, and like, it sounds like you've casually developed so many roles there at Auburn via like
Mhm.
student athlete development and recruiting and all the things. And so
Yeah.
I guess kind of like I'm genuinely interested, I guess, like how you even got to this point. Cause I know you said you were doing some like actual coaching, college coaching,
Mhm.
like prior to
Mhm.
that. And so it's like, what led you to this point, and how you've continued to like just grow and develop with what you're doing now.
Yeah. Uh, so I guess so. Like we just talked about, I was a student athlete. I played soccer at a small school in Florida, Jacksonville University. I grew up in Gainesville, Florida, so I've always sort of grown up around the college environment, the college
Yeah,
sports environment. I have a brother who coaches men's soccer collegiately. And a husband that coaches women's tennis collegiately. So this is sort of the life that
it
we have
is.
all thrived in and love. But um, it all to be honest, it all really started when I was a junior in college. I tore my ACL in preseason. Um, and through that experience, I had been in exercise science and had been casually taking psychology classes because of general interest. And I felt confident that I couldn't do anything with psychology. So I just took them as electives. And through that experience of tearing my ACL and not traveling and throughout the season, my all my roommates being gone and kind of
Yeah.
managing all of the emotions and feelings and experiences that go through that, I started to appreciate this space of sports psychology. And at that time, it wasn't what it is quite now. But I saw a job posting way back then in my senior year that was a sports psychology position at the University of Washington.
Hmm.
And I saw it and I was like, oh my gosh, that is it. That is what I would like to do
Yeah.
with my life. Those are my next steps. And so I finished out my soccer career. And by the time I had gotten towards graduation, I was really within a few credits of a double major. And so I went on and I double majored. And then I started seeking out graduate programs to do sports psychology. And I eventually I went to the University of Florida. And I actually, in speaking with the professors and through that process, I ended up doing a degree in human performance with a specialization in sports psychology so that I could, for lack of a better term, avoid the thesis and do an applied internship because that's really what I wanted to do. I wanted to
Yeah.
do the performance coaching standpoint. I really wanted to throughout my work in grad school, I focused very heavily on injuries and return to play and the psychology around that. And so going through that process, I did an internship down at IMG in their mental conditioning
Yeah. Yeah.
department.
What
Through
years
that,
were you what years were you there?
I was there so just in the last semester of my master's degree, which would have been really, I guess, January through May of 2009.
Okay.
So I'm
I was
aging,
there in January
aging.
through May of 2012. That's why I was curious.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So that was a great experience and got to do a ton of work with a variety of different sports. And honestly, a lot of sports that I wasn't super familiar with.
Yeah.
And so it was a great learning experience. Was connected to the head coach at Southern Methodist University. He had also spent time there, as had one of his assistants. So when they were looking to fill their assistant coaching position, they were seeking out somebody who could focus on the mental game,
Hmm.
who had a background in soccer, and who could bring that component to the staff. And so I jumped on that opportunity, and I was there for 5 seasons. I worked under two different head coaches there, and I loved it. But I met my husband when I was out there. He had been
Mm.
a student athlete and then was working in the athletic department there at SMU when I was there. And eventually, I think the realization that I was not heading towards being a head coach, and that was not my long term goal. He wanted to get into collegiate coaching. He had been a tennis pro, and at that point, and so he had an opportunity to come here to Auburn, and we jumped at it really. And
Yeah.
so from there, I left my position in coaching, and it was sort of this really scary but also exciting. Like I want to do something different. I don't really know what it was. I had a
Right.
real wonky resume, so I think that helps me now in talking and speaking with their student athletes because at that time I was really doing all the director of operations responsibilities,
Yeah.
and I was doing these performance coaching, mental coaching responsibilities, and wellness focused things, and then also had some coaching components and recruiting and all of that. And so was a little bit all over the place, really. And so it took me a little while once I finished my last season there when Chris, my husband, moved here. And then when I came, it took about a semester to really find a job. I found myself, honestly, I was just having this conversation with somebody recently. I found myself applying for jobs on campus and like pushing submit and also being like, oh, I hope they do not call me for this job. That
Yeah.
does not seem like something that I want to do. But admittedly, I needed a job. We needed a job for me. And so um, luckily, this position that I took within the athletic department was the administrator of Olympic sport recruiting.
Okay.
And it had been a pre-existing position that had shifted back into a graduate assistant position. And then our coaches really just were adamant about wanting somebody in a full-time role again.
Hmm.
And so they opened that position as that. And that's what I took. It ended up being sort of perfect for my resume at that point. And then in that role, through the supervisor who was with me at the time, Meredith Jenkins, she was our SWA and my supervisor, and she just kept giving me different things that at the time I was like, what? Why? What is this?
Yeah,
What is
yeah.
this? What is this? And inevitably it grew me into so many different touch points that supported my recruiting role. That was one thing that was really great is I really needed to have those interactions on campus and within the athletic department and build those relationships so that I could bring those resources to our coaches and to the operations of recruiting. And so when they went to restructure the student athlete development space back in 2017, I was asked to be a part of that, which was a blessing. I don't even know that I appreciated this component of
Yeah.
sports psychology that lives in this space that I don't even know that I really knew I was missing as much as I was. Our poor sports psychologist here at Auburn had to kind of endure me picking their brain on an everyday basis. I think just to sort of get that hit of curiosity in that field that I had not pursued. So yeah, and it kind of grew from there. So I've overseen the student athlete development space. Meredith, who I just mentioned, had initiated a program here called Wings, which is Women Inspiring and Nurturing Greatness in Student Athletes. And it's a women's giving fund that lives within our Tigers Unlimited. And there's a mentorship component for our women's sports. And I now direct that. And so I really have just had the opportunity to engage in these spaces and have become very passionate about them and just kind of grown them in my own way through those opportunities.
Yeah, when they started, I guess redeveloping, revamping kind of student
Mhm.
athlete development, I think you said in like 2017, was that like primarily on your plate, or was it like you just kind of like came in and just helped develop that?
Yeah, it was a total restructure, but it definitely was not just on my plate. So we had this really cool and unique opportunity that I think I have probably more of an appreciation for now in hindsight
Yeah.
than I even did in that moment. But myself, who, like I said, I was in Olympic sport recruiting primarily at that time. One of our coworkers, Michelle Kesey, who was our alumni engagement person, both for Auburn Football Letterman's Club and All Sports A Club. And then Janice Robinson, who had been for a long time overseeing Champs Life Skills, which is what this
Yep.
space was. And also an academic counselor. And so Janice had shifted into a role doing specifically student athlete development. She had been in that space for about 25 years at that point. So her knowledge was huge, her experience was huge. We had previously had courses that aligned with student athlete development, accredited courses that were going away. And so it kind of landed on us to re-envision this space, knowing that these courses were not going to be a part of it, and what should that look like. And so because we had this very unique group of
Yeah.
women who were putting this together, we sat down and we talked through what that could look like for Auburn. And I think one of the things that I've come to appreciate about the student athlete development space is there's really no best way to do it. It is
Yeah.
about identifying what your student athletes need to support, who is supporting you and how, and what works within your institution in your space. And really, I think, best is subjective to all of those
Right.
things. And so what we did in that space was Michelle and I had worked together on a variety of things over the years, and we had started even before we had been asked to be in this space, developing this idea of really looking at the student athlete as a lifespan. Like, why are we looking at recruiting in this isolated space of recruiting, and then the student athlete experience in this 4-year experience, and then having to go re-recruit the alumni and connect them and engage them in a way that she was working through. And so we started thinking about this experience and the student athlete experience as a total lifespan,
Hmm.
starting these conversations. I think because I had been in coaching, I was very familiar with the conversation that was, what are you doing for my kid and for me outside of my sport? You know,
Yeah.
a lot
Yeah.
of kids are coming, especially to an institution like Auburn, with the hopes and dreams of becoming a professional in that sport, in some sports, and obviously that has evolved over the years. This is the peak opportunity for our student athletes. And so those are questions you're answering in the recruiting process. And so making sure that as we developed this, we were developing with the mindset that, why are we not having these conversations at that moment? Like bringing coaches in and having coaches buy in, because now we can support the conversations and the questions that they're being asked. But more importantly, I think one of the things that we noticed in all of the research that we were doing was there's a lot of shells of student athlete development, because a lot of people recruit to student athlete development. Um, and so it sort of looked like an opportunity for us where we could package it in a way that could help our coaches and help our parents and student athletes understand what this space is, what the resources were available to them, and what the totality of the student athlete experience was, right? And then create a space where we could invite our alumni in and make them a part of the development.
Mhm.
And so that it, you know, what we were doing was creating this space where our student athletes were constantly able to see alumni. We were creating a real place for alumni connect to, beyond just asking them for fiscal support,
Right.
really asking them for human capital, really at that point. And in turn, it creates a space where our student athletes see that opportunity to connect back as alumni. So we're not re-recruiting them. We're turning around and saying, you know, hey, I see you're doing great in your career. Remember this event? How would you love to be a mentor here now? And it's exciting and it's fun. And so that is how we kind of took a step back and thought, okay, how can we make this the best thing for Auburn based on the resources? Michelle took over our professional development space as the alumni engagement space, which at the time was pretty unique. We've seen more and more positions open that door, but
Mhm.
really it allowed us to again find a tangible space for our alumni to come into, and also like, who better to talk to our student athletes about transitioning into the professional world than the people they saw in their shoes and the people they can hear the same message from. So it's, I think we built that together very much. And it's been a fun thing to oversee and to continue to build over the years.
Yeah, as you guys have built it out, I'm curious is like in just talking with people in the space, it's interesting to get a feel of like how each director, if you will, like goes
Mhm.
about it. Is do you do it more from like in like the student athlete development from more of like an individual sport, like, hey, we're gonna build this around like
Yeah.
15 different sports or whatever it is, or is it more of like the whole like athletic
Mhm.
department, or I
Yeah.
guess it could be some kind of like hybrid version of it.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a hybrid. So we do very few things where we ask all of our student athletes to
Mm.
attend something at one time. One, like from an attention span
Yeah,
standpoint,
yeah,
but but what we did at that time was, I think when we sat back and like I said, we did a ton of research. And one of the things we did was we really took a step back and appreciated that we had so many people within the student athlete support and student athlete experience space who were doing phenomenal things, but siloed, right? And
yeah.
so one of the things we started was having this conversation with counseling and sports psychology and nutrition and sports medicine and academics and student athlete development, and understanding how do we support each other and also the student athlete. And in
Hmm.
doing that, you start thinking about things, and conversations and sharing with the people who are spending, you know, hours at a time with our student athletes, having conversations. You know, I had a conversation with, I have sport oversight for soccer, and I was having a conversation with the athletic trainer, with them, and she was sharing with me a conversation that she had had with a student athlete about one of our freshmen who was really starting to understand that kind of what they thought they were coming into, may not be the major that they want to talk to. And
Yeah.
then that immediately triggers my brain to say, oh gosh, I have a million people that she could talk to about other shifts, right?
Hmm.
Within those interests. And so understanding that those shared conversations and those shared understandings of each of the spaces are only supporting the student athletes further because we're all having conversations and our touch points are all very different with student athletes. And so the way we looked at it is we first brought all of those groups in together and said, how and where are we working together? Obviously, some of those spaces are working together on a more daily basis than others, but just having some understanding and clarity of what's going on in each of those spaces was the first step for us. The second step was for us to identify what was it that the student athletes needed and when did they need it. And so
Mm-hmm.
that's one of the things that we really looked at is, okay, if we're going to do this, we're going to do it well, we're going to do it with a structure. And so what we did was build out a 4-year curriculum for our student athletes. We have for our freshman student athletes, we have a program called Connect, and that's a monthly program, and it's very social. And we bring in resources from within and outside of campus, and we help them understand what are the resources for counseling and sports psychology, topics within nutrition, financial education, NIL, honestly, just some a professional dress fashion show that we started a couple years ago, major exploration. And those we have a leadership academy, which is upperclassmen who go through leadership development and they mentor the freshman events. And so we have a couple of mentors for about 10 freshmen. We really pull them out of the shell that is their sport, and it's kind of forced social opportunity for them to engage and meet people outside their sport. So the biggest component of that is just supporting their transition here to Auburn and hitting them with a lot of different things, but really just personal development and
Yeah.
resource development. Sophomore year, we really start hitting more of a branding, personal, professional branding component. Beginning in sophomore year, they have one event a semester that they come to, and that's the same as junior and senior year, and we evolve those. So again, that second year is really about personal and professional branding. Junior year becomes very heavily professional development, and then senior year, and I think a lot of people forget about this space, we really start building their confidence to transition out. And we're
Yeah.
talking about, we're bringing in our nutrition team and they're talking about nutrition after sport. And we're bringing in our counseling and sports psych team to talk about identity after being here at Auburn in college athletics. And we're usually bringing in an alumni. We're bringing in Regions Bank to support a reality check from a financial education. How far
Yeah.
does a paycheck go? They're always very surprised when they start to appreciate that. So that's how we have built it is creating a curriculum. So we make sure that when we're asking our student athletes to come to something, it's relevant to them in that moment and it makes
Yeah.
sense to them in that moment. Because I think one of the things that we saw is if you're just throwing resources out there and inviting anyone and everyone, they're great, they're hugely impactful, but they're only as impactful as the people that come and the people that need them in that moment. And if they come in their freshman year when most of our student athletes are more willing to jump on going to anything, and it wasn't relevant in that moment, they're not coming back when it is
Yeah.
relevant, And so we also collect feedback for every single event. So we have stats and analytics that tell us at the end of the year, hey, this was really worth their time. And this is something that they recommended at 100% to
Yeah.
continue doing. Or this is something that, they said was great, but like it could be better. And let's look at that. And so we're really big on feedback as well and understanding that we're not what I tell our student athletes all the time is like, we're not naive enough to think that our student athletes are like sprinting through the doors to come to Auburn U
Yeah. Yeah.
activities.
Yeah.
But what we do want is that when they walk out the door, they felt like this was a really great use of their time. And this was something that they didn't even know that they needed. And it was worth their while. So that's our goal with everything that we bring to them.
Yeah. I'm curious. I think you said it's more of like the senior year is like identity that's like my jam, right? Like that's like everything that like I've personally like built out around kind of like mentoring athletes, I guess. And
Yeah.
so I'm curious of like how you got like I guess give me a little sprinkle of like how you guys have kind of like structured that or built that out.
Yeah. So we've done it a couple different ways. We call it senior send off, and we've done we've done 2 workshops in one semester. We've broken out the workshops, and we try and capture our student athletes who are graduating. Like we just did one this past week, and we're trying to capture our student athletes that are graduating in May, in summer, and also in fall. And I think when I go back to saying we really are coordinating with our resources on campus, part of that is to make sure that when we're offering something with our nutrition staff, our counseling and sports psych staff, that it's not a duplicate
Mm-hmm.
experience for any of our teams as well. And so what we do is we really lean into them to say, okay, what are things that we're not getting to on our teams necessarily when we're doing team specific information, helping them understand, counseling and sports psych is a really great example. Like, where are your resources when you leave here? What can you come back to us for? So like for us in Auburn U, because we've pulled in this alumni piece, if you need a resume reviewed, or if you go to the league and then in 5 years you are done with the league and seeking a job, this is still a space for you to come back
Yeah.
and find connections and work with us. That doesn't necessarily exist with all resources. And so helping them understand how to navigate a grocery store,
Yeah.
how to read labels from a perspective that isn't the calorie output that exists within a college athletic experience. And so we work with them. We do our financial education. As you can imagine, financial education, professional development has really evolved with NIL the last couple of years. The perspective we have had is, if we've really built NIL into our professional development. It's all, same concepts. And for us, we're like, shoot, if we can get some kids interested in professional development with the idea that it's helping them in NIL, then like win-win. And at the same time, as we're speaking to NIL education, appreciating that not all student athletes are interested in that, knowing that when they come to an event, they're either going to get the perspective of this is how I'm going to build my career after sport or through my time here, or they're going to get an idea of what they could be doing in this moment with NIL. And most importantly, they're going to understand that what they're doing in NIL right now, if they're doing it well, that could be supporting a life after sport and a career beyond the NIL partnership as well. But so I'd say we lean into that. We just had Derek Furlow, who I'm going to brag on for a second, come in, and he worked with us on Monday for our senior send off. He is the first person that came in our freshman group. We have a male student athlete experience, which is our last freshman one. He's the first one who came in as a non-alumni, but we met him at a conference, and we're just so motivated to get him here. And so
Yeah.
he came in and was wonderful. But one of the things he said, one of the gems he put out in both of those spaces that has resonated with me tremendously is that this statement that the grind is always worth it. You just have to understand what currency you're being paid in. And for me, that has resonated so well, as I feel like our world and our space within student athlete development and generally supporting student athletes is helping them understand that concept, that
Yeah.
they're grinding day in and day out. And if they're only looking at it in this isolated win and this isolated output of success, then they're missing so much of what they're getting out of it. And I think it is our responsibility as the people who support them to just sort of help them with that perspective, that what you're getting out of this is so much more than minutes and accolades in your sport. So that's how we have focused on that, and again, continue to evolve it a little bit each year.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that too. Is that example it makes me think of is like one of the things I always say is like you are the asset, right? So it's like it doesn't necessarily, it's like if you're investing training time, attention, energy, money is like it may not necessarily result in the accolade, the outcome, the result, but like if you're building you, then like on the back end of that, no matter what, if they ever strip the accolade away, it's like you can always go recreate that because it's like you are the asset. You are
Yeah.
the most important piece of the puzzle.
Yeah, and I think I guess my own experience, I think about it all the time, is I was a mediocre soccer player who worked really, really hard,
Yeah.
and I definitely did not always get what I had hoped or wanted. And in the moment, that's really hard. And I think right now, as a professional, as adult who is supporting student athletes, I lean into that so much more, is that my who I am as a parent and as a professional and as a person has been so much developed from my experiences as a student athlete and even as a coach and in this role now. And so the idea of being able to help student athletes see that in the moment, because obviously there's a lot of angst that comes with that in the moment. And hindsight's 2020, and it's so easy for me to sit here now and be like, oh, I learned all these lessons,
Yeah, 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 yeah.
and I found a whole career out of tearing my ACL and all of these things, and that is not what that felt like in that moment. And so trying to appreciate kind of both of those perspectives and acknowledge that what my hindsight 2020 is not what it was when I was their age and working through this. So trying to find the balance of wanting to be like, why don't you see it?
Yeah,
Why
yeah,
don't
yeah.
you see it? And also helping them see it. And so it can get you real passionate about this space real quick.
Totally. And I think that's why, like, just I call it like identity being my jam, because it's like helping them understand. It's like I can think of a story even this year with an athlete. It's like made this huge leaps and bounds, had an injury, and was like, life is over. And I was like, how long is this injury gonna last? And they were like, oh, about 6 weeks. And so I was like, oh, dude, I'm not even worried. And they're like, what do you mean you're not worried? And I was like, because I've watched you build this person. And so I was like,
Right.
it's not going to take 4 more months to rebuild that person. It might take a week, but like you
Mhm.
already have this person hardwired. And so it's like, just continue to invest in yourself, continue to
Yep.
do the things that you've been doing along the way. And like once you're 100%, so to speak, it's like that person's going to flow right back out and you're going to
Right.
quickly get right back to where you are. It's because you've done all the things building up. I would be worried if you were just like half-ass things along the way and weren't investing in yourself and just grind, 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 work, 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 work. And like that was it on the other side of it. And of course, like literally a week ago, I was like, see, one day you'll trust me. They're like, I know, I know.
Yeah. Yeah. It's, and even to take it one step further, like we just had our last leadership meeting with that Connect upperclassmen group. And our conversation at the end of the year is oftentimes surrounding this idea of articulating your student athlete experience. So, obviously you've just been through a year of leadership development, and these kids have been recommended by their coaches as people who have been identified as leaders within the team. They have the opportunity to opt in to this program. And like
Yeah.
I said, it's a personal leadership development piece, but it's also a commitment to mentoring our freshman student athletes, which naturally creates some experience for them. But this last session is about articulating the student athlete experience, and the way that we talk about it in some ways is just, hey, you've just gone through this. Let's figure out, like, how are you putting this on your resume? How are you talking
Mhm.
about this? How are you in interviews having these conversations? But if I'm being totally honest with you, some of that conversation is so we can say, okay, part of the biggest mistake we tell our student athletes, because we tell them two things and they're kind of contradictory statements, is
Yeah.
like, people want to hire student athletes. Like, people want to hire to the skill sets that you guys have developed, right? But this conversation is more about helping them understand that, like, the worst assumption that our student athletes and student athletes in general make is that people understand the student athlete experience and how that translates to an employee and a professional position. And so it is your job as a student athlete to tell that story and to
Mhm.
articulate that in a way that helps an employer or a connection or whatever experience you're having to hear how you have developed in that role. And in doing that, it allows us to talk about soft skills and allows us to talk about that next transition, but it also allows us to sit down and really start thinking, okay, when we're talking about teamwork, like, what does that mean to you?
Yeah.
Or, hey, if we say employers love to hire student athletes, well, then chances are you're not the only student athlete in the final of
Right,
school.
right.
So, like, let's talk about your experience and not just like the generic student athlete experience, but when we talk about communication, when we talk about overcoming adversity and teamwork and leadership, what does that look like? What has your role been? And talking about it, this is a group of upperclassmen from all but one of our sports. And so we get perspective from everybody. And
Yeah.
one of the things we do is at the end of that session, we walk around and I say, okay, now you tell me, what is it that's unique to you and to your sport? And really by the time we get to that, and throughout the year, we've talked about core values, we've talked about communication and managing conflict and all kinds of different things. And this is just as easy as saying, okay, our golfers tells us, one of the things that's unique to our sport is we're never going out and playing the same surface ever. It's
Yeah.
it's new, it's a different day, it's a different condition, it's a different. And so when we're talking about managing the moment and managing the outcome and understanding what's controllable and not controllable, we had a swimmer has gone through an injury, and helping her understand, if you're not speaking to the injury experience and how that has uniquely played a role in your development as a person, then you're missing the mark.
Yeah.
Or our tennis players being able to talk about, and our track athletes and more sports than that they just grew up becoming experts in an individual sport and gymnastics, and then we were like, hey, now do it with a team. How's
Yeah.
that's a cool new experience, right? And understanding that that somebody who has done that really successfully has a whole different perspective and vantage point than somebody who grew up in a team sport and then came to play a team sport. It's not better, it's not worse, but how are you speaking to that? And being able to have those conversations to the component of identity really helps them, I think, dig in a little bit more personally about what this experience has been for them and what they can take out of it. And not just this vague general idea that the student athlete experience is such a learning experience and it sets you up for life, and it does all of those things wholeheartedly. But unless we really dig into that on an individual basis, I don't know that we've effectively taught our student athletes how to articulate that, both personally to themselves so that they know what they are capable of when they walk out the door, but also so that when they're having those conversations with future employers, and it's not just the assumption that when they say, oh, I did this at Auburn, that's enough for them to, that's how I guess we say all the time, being a student athlete at Auburn will get your foot in the door, but you are
Yeah.
responsible for the rest.
I love that too, because it make like one of my like big things is like defining words, because I feel like there's so many words that just get like thrown out there. And
Yes.
so it's like, and it is all the buzzwords. It's leadership, it's teamwork, it's confidence. And
Yes.
that's the big one is like I'll go into a team. I'm like, what's the number one non-physical thing you want? And they're all like confidence, right? I'm like, okay, what's your definition of confidence? And it's like, it's just these blank stares. And I'm like, how do you get something if you don't know what it is? It's like going to the grocery store and having apples on the list and you don't know what apples are, right? So it's like
Right.
we have to put context to this so we can actually move forward and
Mm-hmm.
getting closer to that thing. And so I love that I can just see people in an interview. It's like, well, I was an athlete and so I developed good leadership. It's like, but what does that mean to you? Like, what is the
Right.
definition of that and how do you
Yes.
define that?
Yes, and to your point, teamwork is the same thing. And in our world, my husband and I have this conversation, and this has been one of the most fun things about developing this job is being married to a coach, having had a coach experience,
Yeah.
and being able to kind of brainstorm and have those things. And as we were developing this space, one of the things we kept speaking to is, hey, we just want this more holistic approach. And he was like, I just feel like everybody's going for a holistic approach.
Yeah.
What does that even mean? And in the moment, I'm like, what do you mean? What does that mean? But it also forced me to think about, okay, you can't just describe this new Auburn U space or student athlete development space as this holistic approach. It is that, and that
Right.
is something that we definitely live in. But also like we have to define that in a way that people don't just hear it and be like, ugh, what a buzzword. And
Yeah.
teamwork and leadership are those too, but to being able to really help understand, and you work with teams so you can appreciate this. One of the other conversations we have, and really what we work through with this leadership group is helping what I'd like to think is that we are sort of supplementing the leadership skill sets that they're learning with their coaches and learning within their teams and helping them think how that looks outside their team, but ideally that they're then taking these perspectives back into their team to support the conversations and work that they're doing within the team, right? And so one of the things that we talk about is from a quote, when you went in the locker room first with the John Gordon and Mike Smith, and there's a quote in there that is along the lines of culture is defined at the top and built from the bottom.
Yeah.
Right. And so really break that down and understand, okay, you guys have coaches who are defining a culture for their program and they're recruiting to it and they recruited you to it. And when you guys had conversations about coming here, you heard that message and you decided, yes, this is a culture I want to be a part of. This is a culture I want to support. And now that you're here, it is your responsibility to build that. So generally what the what's signs in your locker room and the things you say and the slogans that are meaningful to your team, but they have to be meaningful to your teammates in that moment too. And so it is the responsibility of the student athletes also to do that work together to understand in this moment, what does this mean for our team? And not just this like vague idea of this is what this program stands for, but the definition of what this program stands for in this moment may look a little bit different than it did 5 years ago. And it may look a little different as success continues to evolve. And so what our goal is in these other spaces, we're not telling them what those are. Those are,
Right.
between the teams and the coaches, but helping them take a step back and understand, okay, what is my role in building this? So, not just, hey, I did this leadership development course, I put it on my resume. But like the best thing I think we have had is when student athletes come to us and say, hey, I think I'm going to retire from the leadership development course. And it's because I would like to be a captain and I would like to really focus all of these things on what that can look like and how I can show up every day in that position. And so I want to be able to kind of step back from this and step into that. And I'm like, we have
Sold.
done
Sold.
well, so yeah, I think for me, student athlete development is that supplemental support, understanding, and by doing that, I also think a big part of student athlete development is buy-in from coaches and from staff, and because the moment that a student athlete, and I say this having been this coach, and so I have a clean sense of it. There's a difference when you are coaching and a student athlete comes to you and they're like, why do I have to go to this event? I'm exhausted. I've had class all day. We're leaving tomorrow. We're doing X, Y, and Z. And if my response in that moment as a coach is, hey, that's an Auburn U thing, or that's a student athlete development thing, it's mandatory, you guys have to go, sorry, I don't have any control over that. That statement sets that student athlete up for that event in such a different way than, I hear you, but like, this is important because, or the reason this is, or hey, this is one event a semester and it's going to connect you with X, Y, and Z. And those two conversations set up a student athlete's mindset for attending something like that in a way that's so significantly different. So for us, we are not just figuring out how can we support the student athlete. We're thinking, how can we support the coach? How can we package this in a way that our coaches can believe in it and speak to it? How can we take this off of the coach's plate when they need that, and also allow them to drive the bus in the spaces that they need specifically to their teams? And to me, that's a perspective that has been really helpful for our growth in this space. And admittedly, when I first started overseeing this space, when you are supporting coaches in their recruiting efforts, you have a lot of trust on the front end. And so that definitely helped. But I think continuing to build support in a way that supports our coaches has been kind of instrumental in our growth to be able to support our student athletes.
Well, yeah, and it makes me think of too is, even when we were talking about like all the words in the locker room, or even like when the event is happening, of like coaches being able to talk about like, hey, like this, we're going here because like we all understand that like leadership is a foundation of like where we need to go. That communication is the foundation of like us like having better unity as a team, and like whatever those things are. And so it's like I always try to remind them too is, I think like I don't know if I made this up or not, but or if I heard it from somewhere. But I always say it's like you don't get what you want, you get who you are. So you can
Mhm.
want all these things, you can want better communication, you can want leadership, but if you're not being the person, if it's not becoming part of your identity, going to these things, having the conversations, continue. I always say it's like it's got to be here, right? Like you can't just learn about it one time and then be done with it, right? Like it
Right.
always has to have that like, constant reinforcement. And so like why those things are so important for them to just, even if it is once a semester, to just keep it at the forefront of their mind. So it is part of
Mhm.
their being versus, like I
Yeah.
always say, it's like words on paper or words in the locker room,
Yeah.
that, that mantra that's 3 paragraphs long that you have
Yeah.
no idea how to regurgitate 2 months into
Right.
your experience here.
Right. Well, and Auburn is such a great example because we have the Auburn Creed, right? And the Auburn Creed is so important to so much of what we do in this space. But the reality is, the Auburn Creed means a little something different to each department, each college, each
Yeah.
team. And so if you can speak about the Auburn Creed in a personalized way, it means something different, right? And it's not just this like that. It's a powerful thing for Auburn students and student athletes and people associated with Auburn, but it is that in different ways
Yeah.
because they have lived in that creed in a different way. And
Yeah.
so I always really love when our teams and our coaches take that and really, our curriculum, for example, is built out 4 years, and it speaks to the Auburn Creed. It's like this part in their freshman year, we're working towards this part of the creed in these ways, and all of our programming is going to speak to that. And in this way, we're speaking to the Auburn Creed in these events, and all of it's going to work. So that's, to me, that goes to it, is like the Auburn Creed it could mean nothing to a lot of people, but it's so powerful because everybody has attributed it to their experience in a different way. And I think that our coaches do a really great job of that often when they're having those conversations. Like, what does this statement, what does work hard work mean for this program and for
Yeah.
this team? And what are these bits and pieces that get drawn out of the creed? What does that mean as it relates to our team and our people? And I think that's been a really cool thing, that there is this consistent messaging that everybody hears it on a regular basis. And the creed is such a perfect example of that because they're hearing it in classes and they're hearing it
Mhm.
on social media and they're hearing it all over the place. And they have branded it to Auburn 100%. But now when they hear it in all of those spaces, that consistent message, they're hearing it and they're internalizing it in a different way. And it's personalized and it's independent of the experiences that they've had. And to me, that is what makes that something more than just a creed for the
Words.
university. And that
Yeah.
is, it's connected people in a different way. And I think that's not just specific to the creed, but all of that. Like, I'm somebody who really loves quotes, and but like just throwing a quote out there,
Right.
here and there. And so when we do some of these leadership development, we'll have quotes, but it's like the whole session is based on like, here's a quote I really love. Now we're going to break it down and we're going to talk about what it
Yes.
means and what
Yes.
it looks like. And kind of like I said, this one that I've been sitting on from Derek since Monday, of this idea that like the grind is always worth it, right? But like, what is the currency you're being paid out in? And like my brain goes crazy and thinking like, how can we share that message in more things that we are doing?
Yeah, I love it. Total side note question.
Okay.
So you mentioned you have kiddos, or
I
kid
do.
multiple,
Two.
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 Oh man,
Mm-hmm.
how old are they? Just out of
Oh,
curiosity.
they are, one will actually turn 3 here on Easter, and one will turn 7 in May.
Okay, I
Two
got.
little girls.
Oh
They
man,
run
I
me
got a
wild.
2-year-old. Yeah.
Yeah.
So my question being like with kiddos and then like you and your husband being basically like in college athletics, like
Yeah.
how wild and crazy is that? Because I can imagine one person, i.e., a spouse, like being in one, but like you're kind of both in it. And so
Oh
as
yeah,
crazy as the world, I'm curious of like
it is.
the
It's a
management
wild
of that.
world. It's a wild world.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll tell you this. I think so so my husband has been it he took the head coaching job at Mississippi State for women's tennis this past summer. And so he actually has been there. And I'll tell you, we sort of live by this mantra. We always have since we first started dating that like, hey, we could take anything on for a year. If
Yeah.
it's going to get us to where we want to be as a family and professionals, we could do anything for a year.
I
And
love
so
that.
we live by that when we left SMU and came here, and he came here 5 months before I did so that I could finish that last season. And it was just us and a dog, and it was fine. And we did this, and we were like, we may be running out on our time of doing anything for a year
Yeah.
successfully. But I think one of the things that it is hard, 100%, it takes scheduling, and it takes a truly a village in the most cliche way. It takes a
Yeah.
village of people, because we also don't, my husband's British and his family lives in England still, and my family lives in Florida. So we don't have a
Yeah.
built-in family support system here. We have a built-in support system of friends and
Mhm.
wonderful humans who help us. But I will say, when my husband first came here, he was an assistant coach on the women's tennis side. And then after 5 seasons, he made the shift over to the men's tennis side.
Mm.
And now he is a head coach back on the women's side. And he has loved different things about both sides of that. But I think with this opportunity, one of the things that appealed to him as a father was, I am going to be working with girls day in and day out who are going to be role models for the daughters that I am raising. And
Mm.
I feel the same way. I've had sport oversight of soccer over this past year, and because Chris has been in a new position, they have come to games with me, and they are around, and their experience being around these women makes
Yeah.
the difficulty of scheduling, and this is an impact that few people get, right? They
Right.
don't get to just be fans. They get to be We had our banquet the other night, and quite honestly, I feel like the women on this Mississippi State women's tennis team and the Auburn soccer team and all the student athletes in between, and the women that I work with and men, they have helped raise our children this year.
Yeah.
And I'm
Yeah.
grateful for that. And there are few professional environments where you get to bring your children into a space that you want them to see. This could be your space, right? This could
Yeah.
be something that you grow into. And if you want to, this could be yours. And obviously, Chris and I are both former student athletes, and we work in this world. So, we have hopes and dreams for them that they don't even know they have yet. Um,
Yeah.
but most importantly, it is hard, but it is more worth it than I can put into words to have our two daughters around these student athletes on such a regular basis, and for them to be just like taken in and loved in the way that they are.
Yeah. I'm curious too. It always makes me think of is do you think because he's coaching women's now again,
Mhm,
correct?
mhm.
Do you think having two daughters, I don't know if it makes it better or helps out or like you just have a different perspective? And the reason I ask is because I owned like a sports performance gym, strength and
Yeah.
conditioning gym for like 11, 12 years. And at one time I had a business partner and he grew up with two brothers, but I grew up with two sisters. And it was like the athletes that came in, it's like I just resonated better like with the female athletes that came in. And he
Mhm.
was definitely like, and so I always wondered is like, I wonder if it's because I grew up with sisters, if I just understand that better. And, maybe him having daughters is like there a certain like
I
better
think there
understanding.
I think there probably is, and we joke a little bit because I think for whatever reason, unbeknownst now to me, again, hindsight's 2020, is I just assumed that we would always have boys. And I didn't, for whatever reason, I
Oh, you
didn't,
don't get to pick?
yeah, I did not envision myself raising girls. And so when we had our first daughter, I was like, oh man, that's kind of weird to think about, an older daughter, and then we're gonna have a younger son. And then when we found out the gender of our younger daughter, I was like, so just girls is what we're gonna have. And I've always said that Chris is an unbelievable women's coach. He's got the personality for it. He's got the empathy for it. He's, when you take out just his general sport knowledge,
Yeah,
his the characteristics of who he is just speaks to being an unbelievable women's coach. And as a female student athlete, when he left the women's game, I was a little bit sad for the women's game because I was
yeah,
like, there's just he's got such a knack for this, right?
yeah,
And so then when we had two little girls, it's hard for me to not feel like he was meant to be a girl dad in the same
yeah,
way that he has this personality and this ability to support female student athletes and our daughters in a way that makes them feel powerful and
yep,
makes them feel strong. And I think it's so yes, I ironically, I guess it's different than what you're asking, in that I do think having daughters has definitely impacted him, and it has made him a little bit more sensitive, I think, to that, to being a women's coach. But I also tend to believe, when I step back, and I appreciate that we had two daughters when we thought we'd have all boys, and he coaches women's tennis when I thought, men's tennis was his long-term goal. I think that he's been placed in a position where he can have the largest impact because
yeah.
that's where his strengths lie. And so yes, I think both of them have impacted the other, but I don't know that he had a choice, I guess is what I'm saying. I think it
Yeah.
was it was
Totally,
inevitable.
totally.
It was inevitable. So, one of the cool things that I have appreciated is the assistant coach that he has hired at Mississippi State played for him here at
Oh,
Auburn. And he recruited her when she was 16. And then when she graduated, she was a COVID kid, and she played part of the time for Chris. And then he moved over to the men's side. And then she was a graduate assistant for me in this space. And now she is working with him there at Mississippi State as one of his assistants. And when I think about why we all are in this world and manage the crazy and want to develop the humans and all of the things, to me, that is it. That's just it. We poured into somebody who now gets to be a part of this for the next generation, and pour in the same way that she felt that, and that she felt that in a way that she wants to be a part of it. And
yeah,
so that's such a cool and powerful full circle moment, I think, for us. And so it reignites your excitement to continue to build those relationships and those opportunities for each generation.
yeah. She's like the older third child, really.
Yeah, let me tell you, she is a blessing for in more ways than one. She has babysat for us.
Yeah,
Uh, she has supported professionally, and she has definitely become a part of our family in so many ways. And so, but what's even, really great about it is when you hear, her talk about her experience and now who she is as a coach. It's like I said, it's just a really cool full circle moment that you don't always necessarily get
yeah,
um to hear. So it's great.
yeah. Last question.
Okay, what you
I
got?
I did not set you up for this one, so you're on the
Oh
spot for this one.
gosh.
All right. So if you're in a stadium with 100,000 people and you could
Mhm.
leave them with one message, what would your message be?
Oh gosh.
On the spot moments.
Yeah. Hmm. I so I will say, I think that if people could walk out of a stadium appreciating the story behind each one of our student athletes' moments, that they're seeing, that their competitive excitement, their, just knowing that all that has gone into those moments. And kind of to that point, having empathy when those moments don't go the way that they want
Yeah.
them to, and in taking a moment to be a fan who cares about the people that are on the field. That, I don't know what that message would necessarily look like, but
Right.
I think for me, that's the best part about, like I said, I grew up in Gainesville, Florida as a Gator fan, and I coached at SMU as a Mustang fan, and I am still fans of those schools. But for me, I walk in and day out and support these people, and I see them on the fields and on the competition courts and the surfaces, and I want the best for them, and I want success for them because I see the work that they put into it day in and day out. And so I think the ability to care for those people while also being blind to the work that they put in, would be what I hope that fans could walk out of any stadium in any competition appreciating.
Yeah. No, I love it. I love it. Um, well, I appreciate you. I appreciate you
Thank
sharing, yeah,
you.
your stories. Is I think that's kind of one of the major reasons of kind of the podcast, so to speak, is I'm just a firm believer, even like in talking with coaches, they're like, well, how do you get a team to X, Y, and Z? I'm like, stories and analogies, stories and analogies.
Mhm.
It's like it's the only way to get them to like resonate. And so it's like, to me, it's like the more stories to put out there, you just never know. It's like, oh, that one resonated with this one, or this one resonated with this one, or
Mhm.
this coach understood leadership from this angle.
Right.
So I just think that that's like super powerful. So yeah, I appreciate you.
Yeah, well, I love it, and I'm sure you're thinking, man, I really got myself into a long conversation with this lady. But it's truly, I agree with you. I think what I've learned over the years is I think when I first started this, I thought to myself, well, I've been there and I've been in those positions and I've been around this. And as I get older, I realize that that's such a small part of coordinating this for so many other people. And that's one of the things that I've really appreciated is getting to be the person who coordinates these messages for the student
Yeah,
athletes to hear from as many people as they can hear them from, and in many different experiences, and appreciating that that looks different for each sport as well. And so that's
yeah,
kind of what I go back to again, is finding a space that supplements our teams and our coaches, and also appreciates that there are spaces that live more specifically to their sport, that they are also doing, and the work that goes into each individual team and each individual experience, on how we can continue to support that by putting them around people who can, continue to speak to their self-worth and their
yeah,
self-value,
yeah,
and their experiences. So thanks for doing this. And I'm the same as you. I will talk to anybody about any of this. And
yeah.
I think I come to appreciate every time. I'm like, man, I really love this space. And I love that people want to pay attention to it and want to see the value in it. And so
Yeah.
thanks for
Yeah.
doing that.
Yeah. No, totally. It makes me think of too. It's like even like when I go in and talk to the team, they're like, Ryan, an hour, hard cut, 1 hour. I'm like, all right, I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's well, and I was it's the funny thing is you look at just the body language of student athletes, and 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 you have this group the other night who they're all leaned forward and they're engaged, and you're like, gosh, I just don't even want it to end, because in this moment they're hearing everything, they're
Yep.
absorbing everything, they're taking everything in. And I don't know when I'm going to have this from them
Right.
again.
Yeah.
So yeah, again, this is a space. College athletics is such a transitional and interesting space, getting more interesting every single day. And just, I think, sitting back and appreciating how can we support, the student athletes in each phase of that is a challenge, and it's one that I think has such a large impact because of all of the things that are changing and shifting. And in addition to those, all the same things will continue to be true. Student athletes will come
Yeah.
here and they will have to transition out, and they will have to, kind of to your point, find their identity while they're here that can continue on, beyond what they are here at Auburn.
Totally. Yeah. Awesome.
Well, thank you for the invitation to chat. I've enjoyed it.
Yeah. Until next time, everybody. Peace.